Greetings, I'm Pat Perry, and I will be your host for this installment of Authors Without Borders Presents. My guest today is Terri Arthur, author of Fatal Decision, Edith Cavell, World War I nurse. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Pat.
Glad to have you. Can we hear a little bit about you before we get started on your book?
Basically, I've had two careers. I've been a nurse for 40 years, and prior to that, I was doing education, but I continued to do education throughout those years as well. I started continuing ed company, and I taught biology in sophomore in high schools, that kind of thing. I was born in New York, raised in Fall River, moved to the Cape, where I live now, and most of my nursing and education has been on the Cape.
Very good. After reading your novel, I became aware of how much of a tremendous impact that Edith Cavell had in history. That was my first exposure to her. How did you find out about her?
Actually by chance and happenstance and accident. I was given a book called Postcards of Nursing because one of my hobbies is collecting antique postcards. And the book was given to me at Christmas time, and it was sitting on the coffee table, and 3 days after Christmas we had one of our famous Northeasters. Electricity went out, and I was sitting by the fireplace with a cup of tea and the cat on my lap and bored, and looked over, and there was the book. It was called Postcards of Nursing, written by Michael Zwerdling, who's also a nurse. And he did something phenomenal. He put together over 600 postcards in this book, and he collected from all over the world. And I was looking at them, and I came across a set of postcards having to do with Edith Cavell, and I was riveted to these postcards because they didn't look like any of the other postcards. And I read the story, because he put little stories at the back of the chapters of the postcards, and I thought I had to be the only person in the world who had not heard of Edith Cavell. So that was the beginning of my research, because I thought I need to catch up here, so I began to research Edith.
So I wasn't the first one then that never heard of her.
Oh no, that's for sure. As I was researching her, I thought I was the only one who had never heard of her before. And I'm active up at my nursing association, went up there, spoke to some of the nursing professors, and they had never heard of her either. I couldn't find anyone who ever heard of her.
So she's kind of like the Florence Nightingale in Europe, and everybody knows about Florence Nightingale, but it just strikes me that the impact that she had, that more hasn't been taught about her, not just in Europe, but here in the States as well.
It's true, and interesting enough, only until very recently with the advent of World War I were they just now beginning to hear about her. Actually, when I was over there doing research, except for where she grew up, which was in Norwich, which is in the northeastern area of England, they hadn't heard of her either. And she was actually from England. I was outside the statue of her. There's a 45-foot statue of her Trafalgar Square, dedicated to her, and it's between the St. Martin's Church and the Portrait Gallery. And when I went to both looking for postcards, neither knew who I was talking about. It was literally right outside their buildings.
Wow. And you would think that her being English, that she would be more well known.
As I said, things are turning around now, but I'll take a bow a little bit of that. I don't think I could find too many people who knew much about her until the book was written. There was another book written around the same time as mine. It's a very different kind of book. But up until that point, there weren't books written on her, except that came up maybe in the 40s, 50s.
When you were there, did you actually go to her hometown in Norwich?
I did. Because I was at the statue and couldn't find anyone who knew her, I was stymied. And I had two friends from the UK who had joined me there, and they came over with their car so that we could drive around and I wouldn't kill myself on the left-hand side of the road. And I said to them, I have to go up to Norwich. And they saw the look in my face and knew there'd be no peace in the valley till we went up. So it's a 2.5-hour drive from London. We did go up. And it just happened that when we went up there that they were celebrating the 90th anniversary of her death. And I just happened to walk into it. And in the back of the book there are actually pictures of some of that. And I was just floored, because up until now she was just unknown. And now I had walked into the epicenter of the people who knew her. And when I walked into the church was filled. There was probably 1,000 people in the church.
Really?
And there was a color guard in the front with everybody, nurses from all over, Salvation Army, Red Cross, veterans, that kind of thing, color guard. And I audio taped the vicar's eulogy at the time, and that eulogy is synopsized in the back of the book. So it's a true eulogy.
So what were her contributions? How did she start, and what led her to, that got her into World War I? What was her plan, her pathway?
Well, her plan was not to get into World War I can tell you that, because the world had never seen anything like World War I. It was the first time for them. She's British, as you know, and she was asked to come to Brussels by a surgeon who was tired of his patients having post-op complications from untrained nuns. They were the only ones who would take care of them at the time, but they weren't trained. And he wanted a trained nursing school in Brussels, so he sponsored her to come over, and gave her a row house of 4 dilapidated buildings, and she had 4 weeks to make a nursing school out of it, which she did. She literally created everything, the curriculum, she even designed the uniforms, she created the lab, the little clinic, and the school and the residents. In doing so, she did follow the Florence Nightingale way of doing things, but she had it much tougher than Florence Nightingale. She actually was in a foreign country, which was very much against this kind of thing. The Catholic Church was very much against this. They weren't ready to give up the bedside. And they didn't really understand the profession of nursing. So she came into a Catholic country, she was an Anglican, where it was a negative atmosphere about this. She had to teach them what a whole profession of nursing was, create a nursing school where there was nothing before, and she had to do it in French. So I always joke about this, and I always say it's sort of like Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, where, you know, they always say that Ginger Rogers did everything Fred Astaire did, only backwards in high heels. So she did everything that Florence Nightingale did in another country, in another language.
One of my favorite parts of your book was Mrs. Lux.
Yes.
She was very hard, very demanding, and the harder that Edith tried to do things, the more she came down on her. And that was just to bring more of her strength, her spirit, and her dedication out.
Yes.
And she was quite the character.
She was quite the character, but she was also another transitional figure. Florence Nightingale was actually on the board of that school.
Oh, really?
And she actually was in touch with Florence Nightingale, Edith Lux. But she wanted to bring the profession of nursing to be a true, recognized profession. She was struggling also. She wanted to get away from the Sari Gump image of the old Dickens novels, you know, of a drunken, slovenly woman who, you know, was at the bedside. So she wanted to, when you're doing that kind of thing, you tend to probably overcompensate a bit. So she did, because she wanted them to shape up and be a true image of the profession.
Because it was kind of interesting earlier in the book, before Dr. I can't remember, Lepage?
Depage, yes.
He said something to the effect of, he was looking for one of the nuns who had left, and he said that if you need any help, just grab the charwoman.
Yes.
And I'm thinking to myself, so she's cleaning the floor and whatever
Yes.
else have you, and then she'll go over there and help a patient who's just been opened up and
That's
stitched
right.
together. And
That's right. Yeah, he was finding, and there's a chapter in the book that shows that he's finding his patients are bleeding out and no one's calling, and they're not being fed, they're lying in their own excrement, they're not given pain medicine as they need, and he's very proud about what he does. He's a very good surgeon. He's a hot-headed surgeon. He's got a bit of an attitude,
yes.
maybe like a few we might know, but he is a perfectionist. And he doesn't want to be doing all the wonderful work that he's doing and then end up having the patient with complications afterwards. And that's exactly true. And a lot of the nurses that were there, especially at nighttime, slept all night. Mm-hmm. And because they had jobs to do during the day at the nunnery.
Yeah, I remember reading, you know, the scrubbing and the cleaning and all that stuff. So, World War I started in the Balkans in 1914, and this marks the centennial anniversary. What kind of memorials are going to be planned for Edith? Do you?
They're really gearing up. Remember that this war was started in 1914, and the UK and Europe began that war in 1914. We didn't get until 1917. Mm-hmm. The war was over by 1918. But they right now are beginning to celebrate the centennial of this war. We're just starting to gear up about it. And Edith Cavell is going to be part of that war. So there's this is one thing that they're doing. Is the Edith Cavell Centenary in 1915. And they're doing quite a few of activities that are going on at the time. They're going to be having activities having to do in Norwich and in London and in Brussels. Mm-hmm. And they're getting together a tour. That they have shows, and there's a play that was written, and quite a few activities. You can go on site. You can actually just put Edith Cavell's name in, and you'll get the website where this came up on. It's actually the www.cavellnursestrust.org, and you will find that all the new things that are coming up about her. But it's going to be quite a thing over there next year, 1915.
When you researched for your book, you actually had several trips over to England, correct?
Yes, I went over there, went to the UK 4 times, I went to Brussels twice. Because remembering, I was studying a time with the war which we were not in the war. So in order for me to get the kind of information I needed during those years, those early years, which is when the book takes place, I had to go over there to get them.
Where else did you go there specifically to research for the book?
I went to obviously the places where they took place. Edith Cavell's archives are not any one place. Her ashes have really been scattered throughout history in many places. So I went to the archives, the Imperial War Museum and the Royal Regimental Museum. There's a regimental museum right there in Norwich, which I went to. I went to Brussels, to all the places in which this book takes place. I felt that that was important to put my feet on the ground, just to actually, so I would experience exactly where these things happened. Because the book is a little different than some of the other books. We'll talk about that later, but the book is experiential, and in order to write a book like this, I needed to be in these places to do it. So what I did is when I went to the archives, I took pictures and talked to the archivists, and I established some resource people so that when I had further questions, I could email them or call them up and say, what about this or that, and they would help me out. And in the archives, when I would see books that I thought would be helpful to me for those years, especially World War I, I knew nothing about World War I. I started this book. And who does know about World War I, right? And
it just happened over there.
It just happened over there, right? And it was a long, long time ago. That's all I know, and everybody's dead. That's all we know about World War I. Lots of people died. And I got the ISBN's numbers of the books that I needed, and then I would go home and then order them off of Amazon, so I wasn't slugging piles of books home. But between the books, the internet, the people that I spoke to, the books that have been written on her, and the places that I went to in the archives, that was the basis of a lot of the research.
Now the letters, there were a lot of personal letters that were mentioned in your book. Are those also in the archives, or was there another place that you could look them up?
Most of those letters are actually in the War Museum, and I did call ahead of time for that archivist, and I asked if they would take her letters out ahead of time for me to look at, which she did. And I went through the letters, and not knowing which letters I would need and which letters I wouldn't, I handed her my American Express card, and I handed her the box of letters, and I said, copy them all and mail them to me. So when I got home, I had a big package waiting for me and a big fat American Express card bill. But I do have all those letters, so when I quote those letters in the book, those letters are directly her letters. That drove the editors nuts, because they wanted to edit her letters, and I kept saying, no, 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 hands off. Whether you like it or not, those are her letters, they stand. So I had to keep telling them that they couldn't clean them up. They had to that's the way they were.
Because I noticed that the connections she had with other nurses, with Miss Lux, for example, that your ability to write about them and their interactions, a lot of it came from the letters, correct?
A lot of it, well, it came from a lot of places. A lot of it came from letters, but there really are quite a few books out on her, like I said, back in the 40s and 50s, that were able to actually talk to people who were there. One of them, actually, is this book here. This book was written by Jacqueline Van Til, and she was a nurse who was with Edith Cavell during the last years of her life, 5 years of her life. And Jacqueline wrote a memoir, and in that memoir, she actually quotes dialogue as to what they actually said and didn't say. And then in many of the other books, Roland Ryder is one of the famous books on her, and there are many others, Judson, Holing, and Kennedy, etc. And they wrote their books early enough that they were able to pick up a lot of the dialogue. So the question I always have is, did you make up all the dialogue, or, was it real? It's 50-50. Yeah. A lot of it is real, but a lot of it, they had to talk about what was going on around them, obviously. So the difference in the book is that they tell you the story. The story comes out of them instead of coming out of me.
And she was also a little bit of a prankster, because she had drawn that picture of the nurse as a charwoman.
Yes, I love that picture because it reminds me of Carol Burnett.
It does, exactly. Yeah.
The old Carol Burnett, clean a woman kind of thing. So I had to smile at that. And she had a background of art. Her mother was an artist, and she actually did quite a few beautiful bits of artwork. This is some of her artwork here. Let's see.
Oh, so she didn't just sketch; she also painted.
She painted and sketched. Yes, this is yes, and she used a lot of that actually in her teaching, when she would teach anatomy and physiology, she would draw beautiful anatomy, and the students always loved being in her anatomy classes because they said they were so realistic. So she had that background of being very, very artsy, and it was some of the ways in which she worked out some of her frustrations.
Which kind of backfired on her with Miss Lux.
It kind of did, because Miss Lux wants everything to be professional, and she's writing the nurses as being a charwoman, and that wasn't exactly what Eva Lux had in mind. Yes.
So she also, like you mentioned earlier, designed the uniforms.
Yes.
Is she also the one that designed the hat?
She did design. She designed everything. She designed the curriculum. She had to find the people to teach it. She had to find the textbooks to use, and she designed the outfits herself for uniforms. She wanted the uniforms to be different from the other uniforms. She didn't want them to look like nuns, you know, with the flying hat, you know, and all that. So she made a very sensible, gauzy kind of hat, and she made the uniforms navy blue and comfortable to move in and to work in. In many ways, she really moved the profession forward to a more modern nursing that we know today.
So she's the one that designed that prototypical hat.
Yes. Well, there's a lot of different kinds of hats, but she did the one that looks similar to, like, say, the Mass General hat with the gauze.
Yes.
You know,
Yep.
It was that kind of thing. Because now they have a lot of the stiff hats and with the stripes and all that. Because today we have no hats, so you needn't worry about it.
My aunt was a nurse, and she had that prototypical little hat thing,
Yes.
and yeah, she didn't like it very much.
No, I know. A lot of the nurses did not like it. The patients liked it because they, you know, it kind of gave them a little distinctiveness about them. But as a nurse, we had problems with it. When I worked in the emergency room, the cap was an issue because it was, kids were grabbing it and it was falling into things and couldn't keep it on, and it got to be an infection control issue.
What is it about Edith that strikes you personally the most?
What strikes me the most is that she represented nursing as well as she did. Her passion and her sense of purpose and her perseverance are all traits that I believe every nurse can identify with. So I really believe that an interesting question was asked me when I was at the gravesite at that 90th anniversary, and it was asked to me, a woman walked up to me and said, at the end of the ceremony, I hear that you're an American, and what is an American doing here honoring a British nurse? And I thought it was an interesting question, and I said, well, I'm a nurse, and Edith is a nurse, and I believe she symbolizes nurses in every country. And of course, she then said, stop talking, and she put a microphone in my face, and she said, this is the BBC News, say it again.
Oh, no, sir.
So I got to be on the BBC News. I was the only one they interviewed for the 5 o'clock BBC News. But what I had to say is true. I mean, she symbolizes nursing and symbolizes those 3 Ps, I think, that every nurse can identify with. I've had nurses who've read the book who said to me, I've got my passion for nursing back again.
And what are the 3 Ps?
It's the purpose, passion, and perseverance.
I learned something. Now, do you plan on, when you go back this year, do you, you have also something in the works with this book. You're going to be translating it into the British version?
My British friends love the book, but they want their own version. And they want the spelling to be British, and they want the vernacular to be British, which I didn't think there was that much difference. But now that I'm almost finished with it with 2 British editors, I realized there was a big difference. There's differences in the same words we use. We use steps and stairs interchangeably. For them, one is inside and one is outside. And it's not interchangeable. In one chapter, I have, in the typhoid chapter, I have them in cots and stretcher army cots. No, you can't have them in cots because cots are what babies are in.
Oh, really?
You have to have them in camp beds. I went, okay, camp beds. So throughout the translation, the British translation of the book, we had to change some of the verbiage as we went along. And of course, some of the spelling, color, O-U-R, you know, some Z's and S's are switched around, et cetera, et cetera. But even the cadence of the way you write or the way sentence structures put together, they rearranged some of that. That meant more to their mentality. So it's been very interesting. They've learned a lot from me, and I've learned a lot from them in the process. So we're now looking for a British publisher to pick up the British-sized version of the book.
How far along are you in translating it?
We've only got about 9-10 more chapters to go, and we'll be done.
Very good.
Yes.
Very good.
And I have one British publisher right now that we've made a proposal to, waiting for him to get back to us.
And the anniversary is?
October 12th, 2015.
2015.
Yeah.
So you might be a best-selling author.
Well, wouldn't that be nice?
It would be very good.
It'd be very good, right? Yeah, I have to say that they've been very open with this book. I thought maybe there were some things in the book that they may not appreciate, but the truth of it is, they're fine with the book. The true test is that I wrote a book about a nurse from another country. Would that country accept that book? And the way I wrote about her, and it turns out, thank God, it's yes.
That almost seems like because so few actually have remembered her, according to you earlier, that it opens up their eyes like, oh, that's our nurse,
Yes.
Why is someone else from a totally different country coming in here and honoring this woman that we should have been honoring?
That's right.
Not just with a statue and that people walk by and don't know who it is, you know?
No, you're correct. And I think that this book, what makes the book a little different than other books on her is because it is a novel, and because it's the kind of book you want to sit down and read. A lot of people like reading encyclopedic history books, but not everybody. And the problem is that most of the books that have been written on her are written that way. They're very detailed. They tell you everything you need to know. It has lots of footnotes, and your eyes are going back and forth with the footnotes and all that. I didn't want that. If people are going to get to know Edith Cavell, they need to read a book in which they feel they're a part of the action, that they're right there. They're seeing, feeling, hearing, seeing, tasting, everything that is happening to these characters. And so the characters speak out of the book and they tell you the story. And I think because of that, more people are reading this book that normally would not read a history book.
Can you give a couple examples of new medical machinery or whatever that were discovered at that time that weren't, this is what it is in scientific terms rather than in use?
She actually comes in at a very interesting time in medical history, and I had to research medical history both in England and in Brussels at the time. I barely knew what it was in our country at the time, but now I know all about England and Brussels. But she was in the hospital when they had their first rentgerogram machine, which was an X-ray machine, and it was a student nurse that it was first used on who got a needle in her foot. She also worked at a hospital in which they specialized in paralysis agitans, and that turned out to be the very famous Dr. Parkinson. She also was part of a typhoid epidemic in which she was a student nurse and in it, nursing in it. And it was a time when they had discovered a vaccine for it and discovered that chlorine could clear the water. So she cuts across a very interesting time in history.
I remember reading about, especially the typhoid situation where they were trying all these different things, and I liked it because it wasn't like, okay, this is what happened, blah, blah, blah. It's people, they're interacting with the news, with the new medical devices, with the new, with whatever was happening at that point. And that's what I really enjoyed about it. It wasn't black and white. It was a nice, colorful, very poignant book.
Good.
So, do you have any Facebook or websites or social media that you would like the readers, the viewers to visit?
There is a website for the book. It's on the back of the book, and it's www.fataldecision-edithcavell.com. There also is a Facebook for the book, and it is if you just Facebook the title of the book. That will come up, and then a lot of new things and things that are done as we go along. That's a little more active than the website, although I keep the website pretty much up.
Oh, good.
But you can keep up with both of those.
The cover. Who designed the cover, Terri?
Well, the cover is very interesting. The cover actually was designed by a cover designer from New Zealand.
Oh, really?
And I found her by going to bookstores and looking at covers of books and saying, what draws me into them? And I kept being drawn to this one set of covers. So I emailed that company and asked them if I could speak to the cover designer, whose name was Linda Culligan. And it took me weeks. And finally, and I kept going back into sites in different ways, and finally I got her, and she emailed me, and she said to me, if you want to talk to me, you have to do it from my home email, not through the business. And we talked a little bit about it. She said that she was under contract and she didn't do outside covers, and I was devastated. But I begged and pleaded mercilessly. I shamefully threw myself at her feet. And I think I probably, just because she didn't want to see a grown woman cry, she agreed to do my cover. Unfortunately, in the middle of the agreement, she lives in Christchurch, New Zealand, and they had that huge earthquake that destroyed Christchurch at the time.
Oh, really?
So I didn't hear from her for a few weeks, and then she came back and said, "Do you have pictures?" And I said, "Yes." And then we put the cover together, and she did a beautiful job.
Very nice. It's very eye-catching.
Yes. She used the colors of World War I and of the time. And, you know, we put the British flag, and we tried not to make it too busy, and tried to make it representational.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have a couple minutes left. Is there anything that you wanted to add about either events, probably in the springtime that you might have going on, or in the summertime?
Well, one of the big ones coming up is this one here. It is at the BU Nursing Archives. I'll be speaking there on April 2nd. And it's a complimentary wine dinner and hors d'oeuvres, cash bar, etc. And it's on 1 Silver Way, 9th floor, Boston, Massachusetts. And you can RSVP or call 617-353-3697, and you can talk to them there. And we'd be glad to have you come on over and do this. This is a very big event. This is their annual event, and this is a group that does nothing but nursing history. Mm-hmm. The speaker that came before me was a speaker who came over from England, from the Florence Nightingale archives, because they're working on a project on her letters. So it's a great opportunity.
And that's going to be on your website as well?
That's on this exact picture is on my website, and it's also on the Facebook page as well.
Very good. Do you have any other speaking engagements lined up for this year, or?
Well, I have other speaking engagements, but a lot of them are specific groups, you know, like hospice nurses and, you know, that kind of thing. But this one is open to the public, so anybody can go to this one.
Oh, very good. And any other appearances, for example, book signings?
I do a lot of book signings, especially when the fairs start coming in spring and that. And if you go on, again, the website, there's a whole full of activities, places where I'm going to be, and it's one of the click-offs on the website, and I keep it updated, and you can check on that and see all the places I'm going to be. In Nurses Week, I've been invited to go down to Washington, D.C.
Oh, nice.
to speak to the Navy Nurse Reserves down there. So that's kind of a great opportunity. And like I said, there's probably, at least at this point, maybe 12 or 16 places that I'll be heading for, book clubs or whatever, and that's all on the website.
I know, we've run into you a couple of times at in Fall River.
In Fall River, yeah.
A couple of other places, yeah.
Yeah, I love it. The one in Fall River is great, yes.
That's one of my favorite.
Yes, it is. Well, it's kind of going back home for me since I grew up in Fall River.
True.
Yes.
Yep.
And people say to me, "Where are you from?" And I say, "Fall River." So.
Well, Terri, our time is just about up. I want to thank you for being my guest today, and I wish you all the best in all your endeavors.
Let me just say that one place you can get the book that's nearby is at the Village Partners bookstore down in Westport. So if anybody's interested, I don't know if the bookstores around here carry it, but I know that she carries it.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you.